Welcome to CF Stories. My name is John Lawley. I'm an executive pastor here at CF Downingtown, and I'm with Josh Waylock. He's our student coordinator, and we'd like to talk at this podcast about video games, kind of the area of perspective of parents. I actually pulled Josh in. Josh actually has a lot of ministry strategies towards video games, but I know as parents in our church, we've gotten tons of questions about how do you navigate through video games, the violence of video games, the sexual images of video games. And so we thought it would be really useful to sit down, have a conversation about it, look at the statistics, look at our experiences in ministry, and see what the best practices are. So first off, I wanted to throw out some statistics here that kind of drove us to sit down and have this conversation. One thing that kind of shocked me when I saw that is the average child plays about 15 hours a week of video games. So that blew me away. So it ends up being about 2.5 hours of video games per day. First thing I thought of when I saw that was, that's only what the parents know, right? They probably play a lot more than that. And so that is crazy, the amount of time and really the addiction that kids have towards video games. And so as parents, that's what they want for their birthday present. That's what they want for Christmas. And so a lot of parents tend to allow for their kids to play video games. But there are just some details that I think sometimes we miss. And so that was some of the things I was looking at, like how many people are concerned about the things that I'm concerned about as a parent. So one thing I'd love to kind of hear from you is, just from your experience, there's a stigma that when a school shooting happens or a kid ends up being very aggressive, that sometimes they'll look at the video game and say, it's because they play a bunch of video games. So just your thoughts on the connection between video games and violence.
That's a great spot to start, because I think it's something that we get concerned about pretty quickly. And it's actually interesting. Violence in video games really became connected at the start of video games, really with the NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, with Mario. Because kids were losing at Mario and they're getting frustrated at home and throwing their controllers just as they do today. And so newspapers were writing articles that Mario was causing violence, which is, to us now, is kind of laughable. Like, Mario, that's the one safe game. Like, what? But if you actually look at, and we'll talk about kind of mass shootings for a minute. If you look at school shootings specifically, between 1980 and 2018, so 1980 to 2018, there were 33 school shootings that occurred. Of those 33, 4 of them were tied to people who were known for playing video games. Like, that was just one of their things that they like to do a lot. Knowing that most mass shootings are men or boys, it's actually surprising that number is so low. And the fear actually started with Columbine, because the boys in Columbine were known for playing 2 games, Quake and Doom, which at the time were very violent to today's standards, not as much. And that was the connection that was made, and the media very quickly took it, and they just kind of ran with it. They're like, these kids played violent video games. That's why they killed their friends at school. That's why they brought guns to school. When really these kids had journals that they were constantly writing in about how they wanted to attack people, that they had plans in video journals even about how they were going to bring guns into their schools and build bombs. This was a mental health issue with those people, more than it was an actual issue with video games. And so if you look at a lot of recent studies through Oxford University, through the Royal Society, they actually show that there's not a lot of conclusive evidence between violence in video games and violence in real life. And there were some older studies that showed a correlation between the two, but what they later found was that those studies were actually done poorly because the people leading those studies didn't understand games. And so what they were doing is they're comparing non-competitive video games, such as, once again, back to Mario, right? A non-competitive video game like Mario to a more competitive video game like Quake, where you're playing against other people possibly, right? There's a competition aspect to it. And so people were getting upset as they were losing or getting frustrated when they were not getting the wins. And so they were like, oh, violent video games cause violence, when really it's competitive video games create the same level of aggression or response that you would see in soccer, or hockey would be a great one, right? Taking the gloves off to fist fight. But that there's actually not much of a difference between video games and a standard sport. But it is that image in your head, right? Your son or your daughter sitting there by the TV or the computer, and they start yelling into the microphone at somebody or throwing the controller around. I have one student, I was giving him a hard time the other day because he's like, yeah, my headset's broken, I can't talk anymore. I was like, oh, what happened? She's like, step on. He's like, no, I threw it when I lost. I was like, what? And really though, that behavior, that's just, it's not necessarily a violence from the video games. It's actually just a poor response to losing.
So let me ask you this question, because I feel like as I do my research on video games, as I'm ministering to students and looking at it from my children's perspective, there is a little bit of an addiction to how they make video games.
Yes.
And so could you talk just about how these video games are meant to not ever really be complete? It used to be, with Mario, it was the end, right? You jumped on the flag and you got that instant reward. Well, now you have these open universes and these open journeys that these kids have to participate in, and they're interacting with people from other places, and you don't know as a parent who they are that they're talking to. So first off, how has video games changed in kind of almost like a psychology way?
Yeah.
And then what do you do with the interacting of people in the World Wide Web? Because it says that probably 60% of kids are directly interacting with other players as they're playing. So it's not only just your kid playing video games, but now they're talking to strangers online. So how would you give advice about how to navigate through the new type of video game and also this kind of interactive world now that they play in?
Yeah, that's a kind of a two-part question. So I'm going to try and answer both parts, but if there's any confusion, feel free to ask for clarity. Part one, in video games, you see really right now two main types of games that you're going to see. You're going to see single-player games or single-focus games where if you are working with other people, you're working in the same direction. You're not competing against one another. But most of the time, it's just a single-player game. You're just having fun by yourself. And a lot of times, they're these open worlds. They're massive. They're huge. There's just so much that you could possibly accomplish. It's not like you look back at the NES, right? And the first Zelda game came out. And what was so amazing about Zelda was that was the first game that had memory to it. So if you could save it and play it again later and continue where you were. And because it was this mind-blowing thing of wow, this game's so big, I can't finish it all in just one sitting. Because before then, you should have been able to finish a video game in a single sitting. And nowadays, we have these games that are so big. You look at one game I would definitely not recommend for students, but you look at a game like Grand Theft Auto, and they're looking at for their next one, the map of the game, right? The scope of the game would be the entire country of the United States of America. That would be the size of the game, right? And imagine playing as a player traveling across that. It's just too much. There's a lot that you could spend your time doing, and it kind of feels endless at a point because there's the main goal, and then there's all these side goals and side quests and missions on the side that you have to do. And that can be very time-consuming, right? And it's very addictive because there's always another thing to do. But then secondarily, in competitive games, in the way I like to look at it with competitive games, so if you look at a Fortnite, or you look at Call of Duty, Battlefield, all these more competitive games, it's kind of like playing. Imagine you went out to play football with some friends, and you guys are outside, and when you play football, you're having fun, and it's a great time, and nobody ever stops playing football because they got bored of playing football. Everybody stops because you're wearing out, you're tiring out. You can only do it for so long, right? Then you got to take a break, drink some water, hang out, go eat some food. But video games are different. They don't wear you out. You're not getting tired. Your legs aren't getting sore. You're competing and you're challenging one another. You might get a little weariness in your thumbs, or maybe you've been sitting upright for a little too long, and so you're getting a little sore. But it's not the same, and that's kind of where the worry comes in for the addictiveness, right? Because there's no natural way to stop. Where a sport or any physical competition, our bodies start to wear out, and that's what causes us to stop doing what we were doing. And then the second part of your question was online play with other people, right? And once again, just like football, basketball, right? There's that camaraderie, that community that comes with it, right? It's fun to compete against one another, but then you also have those friendships and that community. The problem with video games right now and online, and this is something I think is actually a very real danger in video games, right? We look at violence in video games, I'm like, not as much of a real concern, but online play actually does become a real concern. Because in online play, a lot of our students, right, a lot of your kids they just hit that random button. They go online.
So explain what that is. What do you mean by that?
So let's say, I'm going to use Fortnite, because Fortnite's a great example. Everybody knows what Fortnite is, but maybe not everybody knows how it works. So Fortnite has 3 core game modes. There's solos, duos, and squads. So if you choose to do solos, it drops you onto a map with 99 other players. And you're by yourself, you're not talking to anybody, and you're trying to be the last man standing. Duos, though, adds another element to it. You're not playing with another person against 98 other players. So if the two of you are working together, you're talking to one another, and you're trying to work together to be the last two people remaining on the map. And in squads, it's a similar format, but now there's 4 of you facing against 96 other players, and you're all talking together, working together. And what a lot of people will do is they'll just hit a button that says fill. And so when they jump into a match, they'll jump in by themselves, and the algorithm of the game will then put in 3 other players with them to play with them. And so now your son or your daughter's at home, and they're playing with 3 strangers from somewhere across the country.
And they're interacting.
And they're interacting, they're talking with them. And that's where I say the real danger of video games actually arises, because you don't know what's happening in those conversations, right? If you look at a game like Fortnite and you look at the rating it has, right? I think it's a T rating probably. And there's a little bit of gun violence in it, but there's no blood, no actual death. They kind of just get teleported away when they die. There's no like significant levels of gore or violence or even sexuality within the game. But those conversations that happen in online play, you never know what's going to be said. You never know what's going to happen. And that's actually why I always encourage parents, and when I talk to parents, I say, it's very redeemable. It's not the end of the world if they're playing online in these games, but make sure they're not playing with strangers online. So either they're playing those solo games where they're playing against other people, but they're not vocally interacting with other people, or encourage them to play with their friends from school or their friends from church. We actually have a parent here at the church where her son's only allowed to play video games on the weekend, but if he wants to play during the week, it has to be with his church friends. And she uses it as an opportunity for him to build relationships and friendships with his friends from church. So that way, if he wants to play Fortnite during the week, he has to go and invite his friends from church and make friends in this small group and ask them to play with him during the week.
So then you're saying, and this is really good, I think a lot of parents don't even know just the functionality of the game. They see their kid while playing the game. I don't know how to play Fortnite, and so this is really helpful. So would you say then, from a practical point of view, it would be healthy? Because again, how do I know as a parent which one of these players are my friends? So it would probably be helpful, from what I'm hearing, is to almost kind of know the list of your kids' friends, know their usernames, so that you can kind of stop the game and see if they're playing with friends, to almost do some research to understand who is playing the game, so that you don't have that mystery of, I think they're his friends, but I don't know. And would you say that even putting that standard up as a parent, one, could protect your children, but 2, allow them to still play a game that they love, but to give them some shepherding and guiding with that? Are there any other ways you think parents can come alongside of their kids to make sure that they're allowed to play, but maybe like to redeem? You mentioned the word redeeming. What we found in student ministry over the years is you can't say don't do something that somebody loves that is their passion. You have to try to point it towards the gospel, point it towards Jesus, or in this case, point it towards a gospel community. So is there any other tactics, any other strategies parents could have when they're like, look, my kids love video games. How do I redeem it? How do I make it something that builds their character? Because we're going to talk a little later. There's tons of things I can say are the dangers of playing video games on a practical note, like social interaction, getting outside, the health of physically. But how can we redeem the areas of video games if that's kind of where we are, other than just monitoring the games?
No, and that's really good to know, right? Because we look at video games and they're not going away, right? It's not a fad. I think when the NES came out, they were like, this will come and go. The kids will just go back to the arcade eventually, right, and play Donkey Kong. But it's not, right? If you go about half an hour from our church down towards Pottstown, there's a kid there named Booga. I don't remember his full name, but he goes by the name Booga when he plays. A few months ago, he just won $2 million in a Fortnite tournament in New York City, recognized as the greatest player on the planet, right? And so he's 16 years old, right? Video games are not going anywhere when it comes to our kids. In fact, they're growing and it's expanding. But I think back to when I was younger and I was a child, and I always asked my dad if he would play games with me, right? Like, first I tried getting him to play the games I like to play. I tried to play Smash Bros. Together, or Mario Party, or even like James Bond. And he would always say no. He'd be like, no, I that's not my thing. So then I even tried harder. I was like, well, Dad, you want to play Madden? You want to play some football? We can do basketball. And he would always say, no. He's like, that's just not my thing. And to my parents, it was just a toy, right? It was simply just a toy that I would play with, and it was nice for them because then they could go watch TV or do their own thing while I was occupied, not making any trouble in the house. What I really encourage our parents to do, sit down, play these games with your sons and with your daughters. I often joke and I say, video games are the new catch, right? And there's still definitely a need for going outside and throwing a football with your son, or shooting hoops with your daughter, or whatever that is. But there's something powerful that when your child loves video games and they enjoy playing them, that you sit down with them and you play, suddenly you're opening up avenues of conversation that you would not normally have.
Right.
Because now they're feeling comfortable around you. Now they're feeling ready to talk. They're kind of focused on the game that they're playing, but because you're also playing it there with them, their walls are down a little bit, right? They're just distracted enough and they're happy enough that you're with them that they'll start opening up about things going on in school, the friendships that they're having. They'll tell you things in their lives that maybe they wouldn't want to normally share with you because they're afraid that you would get upset with them, that you would be frustrated with them. Use video games as your opportunity to develop relationships with your sons and with your daughters, to get to know them a little better, right? As I said, it's that new catch, right? As you used to stand outside and throw a football together and you just kind of chatted, it's the same thing, except instead of a football, now it's a controller in your hands. And I still say to parents, so there's times for you to sit down with your child and do what they love, and then there's times also for you to teach them how to do some new things, right? And sometimes you got to teach them how to have catch outside, or go for a hike, right? Or go for a bike ride, or whatever that looks like for you. But there's that balance of, hey, once in a while, sit down with them, learn the games that they're playing, figure out what you should be concerned about, and what you should not be concerned about. But spend that time with them, because that's super redeemable. And I can't think of a single student in our student ministry that if their mom or their dad was like, hey, can I play Minecraft with you? Or can I play Smash Bros with you? That they'd be like, no, that's weird. They would love it. They would think it's so awesome.
Yeah, that's huge. And just from my experience, what I've seen, like examples of this done amazingly, is it's a unique thing because most of the time your teenager or your kid is going to have to teach you how to do it. So it's going to give you a posture to say, you're allowed to speak into my life and teach me something. And it breaks the barrier for you to then go back and teach them other things. And so I had a dad say that he used to play video games, but he would say, hey, we'll play a half an hour of this game, but you got to take a walk with me after. And so then he kind of built this pattern of saying, hey, we're going to spend time on your area. And then I know the value of just opening up those conversations. And it just breaks those barriers of, I have nothing in common with my parents. And what we found, in especially as they get to teenagers, is they do separate from mom and dad when it comes to their friends become their identity. And so, and a lot of that happens, apparently 15 hours a week through video games. And so a couple things that I've heard you say that I think are just really good takeaways. One is video games can be used to build community and connection with others that are healthy relationships. Because others who are playing video games, not all of them are created equal, right? And so be aware of the community that your kid's playing with. Be intentional to encourage them to be with people. If they're going to interact on a non-solo game, to interact with people that are going to be healthy for them to interact with. And there's some even options here in church of times and opportunities to do that.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that as well.
And then also the idea of like redeeming the opportunity to build a relationship through video games. Don't just see it as something your kid likes, but take some interest in it to open up the doors for conversations. And chances are, when you take that walk with your kid or you go out and do something outdoors, your kid will love that, but you won't even maybe ever get that opportunity until you step into their world and then they're willing to step into the things that you're passionate about. That's really good. But I just mentioned briefly, there are some opportunities for parents to say, okay, I've got a teenager specifically that goes to our church at CF Downtown. Here are some opportunities for me they're already doing it, but how do I help redeem it? And you mentioned there's a couple groups that they could even be part of.
So first of all, if you're a parent and you have questions about video games, come talk to us. We're always up here in the loft on Sunday mornings hanging around. I'm always happy to answer questions. This is a topic I'm passionate about because I think it's such a powerful tool for parents, but it's also such a trap for students at times if it's used wrong. So I'm always available to have questions or just kind of maybe solve some problems. But when it comes to communities within our church, we actually, if you go into Church Center, it's our app that you can download from the App Store. If you go through our small groups, you actually see one under the student ministry tab that's labeled Fortnite Squad. And it's kind of a joke we play on because it has squads, right? Mm-hmm. So we play squads together in Fortnite. And so we just get together and we hang out together and we build those relationships. I probably have 20 to 24 students on my friends list on Fortnite. And so anytime I hop on, they're jumping in my lobby right away. I actually told them because at first they were afraid. They're like, Josh, I don't want to can I text you if I can play? I was like, no, if you see me on, just jump in. I always want you guys to be in my groups when I play. I actually very intentionally only mainly have students and a couple close friends who I know will handle being around students in these games, because that's the relationship I want to have with our students, that when they're on, they can talk to me, we can hang out and goof off. Even the other day I was playing with one of our students, and his friend jumped on and asked if he could play with us too, and so I'm talking, I hear in the background his mom's like, she's like, Caleb, who are you hanging out with? And Caleb's like, I'm hanging out with my friend and his youth leader. And and in the background she's like, what? But even the mom was just so happy to hear that. Like her son was like around these good influences while playing video games. And turns out he went to another youth group down the street, and so it was a cool thing. But this past Sunday, we actually had a Fortnite hangout, right? Now, we said we had a hangout, but we were all hanging out on our respective couches. And so we had about 18 students jump on to play Fortnite. And so we did a Bible study beforehand. And then we jumped into a custom match. So as I explained before, there's those different types of matches in Fortnite. This one's a unique one where we can set our own rules and our own expectations. So it was just us and our students. There was no outside presence, right? It was only 18 players playing together. And it was really awesome, able to build community. I think 4 to 5 of them actually weren't even our students. They were just friends of our friends from school that wanted to play along, and they heard something fun was going on. And so now they got to hear a bit of the gospel and the importance of having Jesus in their lives. And but that's the community that we want to build. We want to say, hey, if you're going to be hanging out with people online, let's make sure that they're people who will have a good influence on your lives. I was talking to one of our parents a few months ago. It was actually at our Aussies All-Nighter. One of the parents was helping out with it. And they were like, yeah, for a long while, I felt bad because I felt like my son just didn't have a lot of friends. He wasn't always wanting to hang out with his friends after school. He just went up in his room and played video games. And then one day it finally clicked, and I realized he is hanging out with his friends. He's just doing it in a way that I never did when I was a child. Right. And that's something important to remember, is a lot of that community is still happening. They're still goofing off. They still have their inside jokes and their humor together.
The desire's still the same.
Exactly.
Right?
It's just the location kind of changes. Right. And so it's a bit of a different world, but it's super redeemable. There's so much that we can do with it. We just have to be aware of it and the pitfalls that can occur with the addiction that comes with playing it too often. But just as anything can be addictable, right? Any good thing. I have a problem with sugar. I eat way too many sugary snacks and candy, and same thing with video games, right? There's a benefit to it, but there's a negative side. And if you can limit the time, if you can limit who they're playing with, if you can know the games that they're playing and sit down with them. I have parents that come up to me and they're like, Josh, and this is kind of a little off topic, but just something to talk about. They're like, Josh, how do I know which games are good and which games are bad? And the easiest answer, if it has an M on it, don't buy it.
Yeah,
right. The M stands for mature, blood, extra levels of violence, swearing, sometimes even nudity, right? And so that's a very easy first step. But then second, just Google it, right? Just Google like Fortnite ESRB rating, what's in this game, and that'll bring up a list of things in the game that you as a parent should know about and be aware of. But sit down and play them, and you'll very quickly learn what your children are immersing themselves within.
Yeah, and that's great, Josh. And really, the games will change. In a couple of years, Fortnite might be something different.
Exactly.
But the goal to point kids towards Jesus doesn't. And we have to redeem it. We have to.
Yeah.
Because to your point, it's not going away. And so how do you inject Jesus and the community and the gospel into that world that they're in? because I think the goal is still the same. They want community. Their identity sometimes is wrapped up in that in an unhealthy way, and we have to speak into it. We can't just allow it to be undefined from our perspective of people who want to disciple.
Yeah.
And so, Josh, thank you for joining us.
Course,
thank you for talking. What we're trying to do here with these types of videos and podcasts and conversations is really just to equip you as parents. And so we're going to be all over the place with our conversations, but the goal is for you to take this content, if it's useful, share it with parents in the area, talk about it with your spouses, talk about it with your kids, because as we partner with you as a student ministry, as we partner with parents, not only here in CF Downingtown, but also in the community, the goal is to just equip you to make disciples of Jesus Christ. And you are the primary disciple in your home. And so we just want to partner with you in that way. So as Josh noted, feel free to reach out to us. Josh is more of an expert as it regards to video games, and because we have people from all different perspectives that all love Jesus and want to help. And so thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening or watching this video. And we hope you have a great day. Blessings.